Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back in time, way back, to a kingdom shrouded in mist and myth, where dazzling artistry met formidable power. Imagine yourself wandering through bustling marketplaces, the scent of shea butter and spices heavy. In the air, the distant rhythmic pounding of a blacksmith's hammer echoing from a hidden workshop. You pass by colossal mud walls, so thick and imposing they seem to whisper tales of ancient battles and forgotten glories. Above you, the sun. A fiery orb in the West African sky casts long shadows across elaborate bronze plaques adorning grand palace gates. You can almost feel the smooth, cool metal beneath your fingertips. See the glint of sunlight on intricate designs, each telling a story of kings and conquests. We're talking about a place where art wasn't just decoration. It was history, spirituality, and power, all forged in the crucible of human ingenuity. You're about to discover how a civilization in what is now modern-day Nigeria mastered the art of bronze long before many European counterparts even figured out how to consistently tie their shoelaces, let alone cast intricate metalwork. Fair warning, this journey might just lull you into the deepest, most history-infused sleep you've ever experienced. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now down in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. As you settle in, imagine the humid air, thick with the scent of damp earth after a recent tropical downpour. The land before you is a mosaic of dense rainforests and sprawling savanna, a vibrant tapestry of greens and browns that stretches to the horizon. This is the stage for our story, the Kingdom of Benin, not to be confused with the modern-day Republic of Benin. This ancient kingdom was located in what is now southwestern Nigeria, a geographical sweet spot that allowed for both agricultural bounty and strategic control over trade routes. You're not just observing a map. You're feeling the very ground beneath your feet, rich and fertile. It's sustaining generations. The kingdom's roots stretch back to the 11th century CE, a period often shrouded in oral traditions and fascinating legends. You see, unlike many European histories that rely heavily on written chronicles from that era, much of Benin's early narrative comes from stories passed down through generations, recounted by griots and elders. These tales, vibrant and full of symbolism, tell of a time before the Great Abbas, when local chiefs, known as the Ogaso, ruled the land. Imagine a collection of small, independent communities, each with its own leader, jostling for influence. It's a bit like trying to organize a playdate for a dozen toddlers, each convinced they're the main character. Historians still argue whether the Ogaso period was a unified kingdom or a collection of autonomous chiefdoms. But what's clear is that it set the stage for something much grander. One mainstream historical fact you should tuck away is that the transition from the Ogaso to the Oba dynasty marks a pivotal shift in Benin's history, establishing a centralized monarchy that would endure for centuries. This wasn't just a change in leadership, it was a fundamental restructuring of power, leading to unprecedented stability and growth. Think of it as upgrading from a clunky dial-up connection to high-speed fiber optic, a significant leap in efficiency and capability. Now for a quirky tidbit. One of the most famous legends surrounding the end of the Ogiso era involves a banished prince named Ekaladerhan, who journeyed to the Yoruba city of Ife. The story goes that the people of Benin, tired of the disunity and strife after the last Ogiso, sent an embassy to Ife, pleading for a prince to rule them. Ekaladerhan, now known as Oduduwa, was too old to return, so he sent his son Oranmiyan. Finding the local customs challenging and perhaps a tad bit chaotic for his royal tastes, eventually declared that only a child born and bred in Benin could rule effectively. He then fathered a son with a local princess, a child who would become the first OBA of Benin. It's a narrative steeped in diplomacy, a bit of culture shock, and ultimately the birth of a new lineage. You can almost picture Oranmiyan a bit. Flustered, thinking, look, I love you guys, but I just can't with this humidity and all these complex rituals. Let's get a local kid on the throne. It's a mythical origin story, while perhaps not verifiable by archaeological digs alone, served a crucial purpose. it legitimized the new dynasty, linking it to the revered Yoruba city of Ife, known for its own rich history and powerful artistry. It solidified the Aba's spiritual and political authority, giving them a divine mandate to rule. See, the power of a good story can be just as potent, if not more so than an army, especially when it comes to convincing people to follow. And follow they did, paving the way for the incredible empire you're about to explore, one magnificent bronze at a time. So, with the early seeds of power sown, the stage is set for the rise of a kingdom that would astound the world with its artistic and political prowess. As the curtain falls on the mythical origins of the Aba dynasty, you find yourself standing on the cusp of a transformative era for the Benin kingdom. The first Aba Yuakai is crowned, marking the true beginning of the centralized monarchy. That would define Benin for centuries. Imagine the quiet anticipation in the air, a sense of a new chapter unfolding. The transition wasn't instantaneous or entirely smooth, of course. Power shifts rarely are. You can almost hear the murmurs of the old chiefs, the Uzama Nihinran, those powerful hereditary kingmakers, as they gradually ceded influence to the burgeoning authority of the Aba. It was a delicate dance, a slow, but steady consolidation of power that would forge a stronger, more unified state from the patchwork of smaller chiefdoms. This early period of the Obe dynasty, roughly from the 13th century onwards, was characterized by the Aba's relentless efforts to assert their dominance and expand their sphere of influence. Think of it as a fledgling startup, gradually acquiring competitors and streamlining operations. Oba Udo, who ruled in the late 13th century, is often credited with strengthening the monarchy significantly. He moved the royal palace to a new, more strategic location within the capital city, Ubanu, which would later evolve into Benin City and establish new judicial structures. This mainstream historical fact highlights his role in institutionalizing the monarchy and creating a more formal administrative system. You can picture him, a stern but visionary leader, meticulously planning the layout of his new capital, ensuring every street and building radiated the authority of the throne. The city itself began to grow, its distinctive concentric walls slowly taking shape, layer by protective layer. These weren't just simple barriers. They were massive earthworks, some towering as high as a multi-story building, stretching for kilometers. A quirky tidbit about these walls is that they were so extensive. They were once considered the largest man-made structure on Earth before the advent of modern machinery, even surpassing the Great Wall of China in terms of total length. Imagine the sheer human effort, day after day, year after year, digging and piling earth, creating a defensive marvel that would protect the burgeoning kingdom. You'd probably break a sweat just thinking about it, even in your cozy bed. This monumental undertaking speaks volumes about the organization and communal effort that the early Abos could command. The Abos' power wasn't just physical, it was deeply spiritual. They were seen as divine rulers, intermediaries between the human world and the ancestors, and even the gods. This spiritual authority was crucial for maintaining control and inspiring loyalty. When an Obe spoke, it wasn't just a political decree. It was imbued with a sacred weight. This belief system permeated every aspect of life, from daily rituals to grand ceremonies. You might observe a bustling festival, vibrant with music and dance, where the oboe, resplendent in ceremonial attire, performs ancient rites, cementing his divine connection in the eyes of his people. Historians still argue whether the early expansion of Benin was primarily driven by defensive needs against aggressive neighbors or by an inherent desire for conquest and control over valuable resources. Perhaps it was a bit of both, a dynamic interplay between securing borders and seeking economic prosperity. As the kingdom expanded, it encountered various ethnic groups and smaller polities, integrating them through a combination of military force, strategic alliances, and diplomatic marriages. It was a complex geopolitical game, long before any European powers ever thought of drawing lines on a map. You can envision the Ayaba's envoys, adorned in fine cloth, negotiating treaties in one village, while at the same time, the Ayaba's formidable warriors, armed with iron weapons, were ensuring compliance in another. This blending of soft power and hard power laid the groundwork for the powerful empire that would soon emerge. The foundation was being laid, brick by invisible brick, or rather, earth mound by earth mound, for the golden age that lay ahead. With the foundation of the Oba dynasty firmly set, and the city of Benin gradually transforming into a formidable stronghold, you feel the momentum gathering, pushing the kingdom towards an era of unprecedented power and influence. This isn't just about securing borders anymore. It's about strategic expansion, about the architects of empire shaping a vast dominion. The Abas who followed Yukai, especially beginning in the 14th century, were not just rulers. They were shrewd military strategists and astute administrators, consolidating their authority and pushing the boundaries of their nascent state. One of the most pivotal figures in this period, a mainstream historical fact you should absolutely note, is Oba Uer the Great. He ruled in the mid-15th century and is widely considered the greatest of Benin's warrior kings. Before him, the kingdom faced a period of civil strife and instability, a sort of medieval political squabble that threatened to unravel all the progress made. But you are a man of immense will and tactical genius, quelled the rebellions, unified the disparate factions, and then turned his attention outwards. Imagine him, a figure of imposing stature, his gaze unwavering as he personally led his armies. He was a force of nature, much like that particularly persistent mosquito buzzing around your ear that you just know you'll eventually have to deal with. Under Oba Uer, Benin's military machine became truly formidable. You see, disciplined. Warriors, organized into various guilds and units, armed with iron swords, spears, and shields. Trained in the dense rainforest terrain, they were masters of ambush and siege warfare, their movements swift and decisive. You were embarked on a series of military campaigns that expanded Benin's territory far beyond its immediate environs. He conquered vast areas, subjugating neighboring towns and villages, extending the kingdom's reach to the Atlantic coast in the west and eastwards towards the Niger River. This expansion was not just about brute force. It was often accompanied by the establishment of tributary relationships, where conquered peoples paid tribute in goods, services, or even manpower. Enriching the central treasury of the Oba, you can picture long lines of porters, laden with yams, palm oil, and perhaps even exotic animal hides, trudging towards Benin City, testament to the Aba's growing power. A quirky tidbit about Oba Uer is that he wasn't just a warrior. He was also a visionary urban planner and a patron of the arts. He rebuilt much of Benin City after the civil wars, introducing new streets and administrative structures. He even mandated the planting of specific trees along certain thoroughfares, creating shaded avenues long before modern city planners thought of such amenities. It's almost as if he anticipated future Yelp reviews. Great city, good shade, highly recommend. Historians still argue whether his artistic patronage was purely aesthetic or a deliberate tool for political propaganda, subtly reinforcing the Oba's power through magnificent artworks. Regardless, it laid the groundwork for the bronze artistry. That would soon define the kingdom. The kingdom's administration became increasingly sophisticated under Uer. He established a complex system of chiefs and officials, each with specific duties. Reporting directly to the Oba, this centralized bureaucracy allowed for efficient governance of the expanding empire. From tax collection to justice administration, you can imagine the meticulous record-keeping, the flow of information, and the swift communication that kept such a large territory under unified control. This sophisticated system allowed the Oba to wield immense authority, ensuring that orders from the palace were carried out efficiently across the kingdom. Much like a well-oiled machine, though perhaps with a few more ceremonial dances thrown in for good measure, the strategic brilliance of these early Abas, particularly Uer, transformed Benin from a regional power into a true empire, setting the stage for its legendary artistic achievements. Having witnessed the formidable expansion of the Benin kingdom under the warrior Abas, particularly Uer the Great, you now feel a subtle shift in the air, a different kind of vibration. The clang of the blacksmith's hammer, which was once A distant echo of war now takes on a more refined, almost melodic tone. This is where the story truly begins to shimmer, for we are about to delve into the heart of Benin's artistic soul, bronze. But to call it merely bronze feels almost criminal, like calling a symphony just some notes. For the Edo people, bronze was far more than a metal. It was a medium for spiritual connection, historical record, and the embodiment of royal power. Imagine holding a piece of this metal in your hand. Its cool, smooth surface reflecting the dim light of your room. It's not just copper and tin. It's imbued with meaning, carrying the weight of centuries of tradition and belief. For the Abas and the Edo people, bronze, or more accurately, brass, a copper-zinc alloy, often interchangeably called bronze in historical contexts, possessed intrinsic spiritual properties, was believed to ward off evil, purify, and provide a lasting link to the ancestral world. You can almost feel the reverence, the hushed awe that accompanied its creation and display. This mainstream historical fact that bronze was a sacred material, deeply intertwined with the spiritual and political life of the kingdom, is central to understanding its significance. It wasn't just decorative, it was functional in a profoundly spiritual way. Consider the role of the Oba as the divine ruler. He was the primary patron of these magnificent bronze works. Each plaque, each head, each figure was not merely a pretty object to adorn the palace. It was a meticulously crafted narrative, a historical document, a spiritual conduit. They depicted court life, great battles, ritual ceremonies, and most importantly, the Abas themselves and their ancestors. You can almost see an Aba commissioning a new work, carefully dictating the scene. The symbols, the figures, ensuring it accurately reflected his power and his place in the grand lineage. It was, in essence, a royal Instagram feed, but infinitely more permanent and with far less duck-dash face. Now, for a quirky tidbit about the source of this precious metal. Benin itself did not have significant copper or zinc mines. This means that all the raw materials for their extraordinary bronze casting had to be acquired through extensive trade networks. Imagine caravans trudging through dense forests and across savannas, laden with goods to exchange for chunks of copper and ingots of zinc, perhaps from as far away as North Africa or even Europe once trade began with the Portuguese. This reliance on external sources underscores the economic power and sophisticated trade relationships Benin had cultivated. It also makes you wonder about the initial spark who first brought the knowledge of bronze casting to Benin, or how they independently developed it to such a high degree. Historians still argue whether the initial inspiration for Benin's bronze art came solely from the Yoruba city of Ife, or if there was a parallel, independent development within Benin that was later influenced and refined by Ife's renowned artistry. What is clear, however, is that Benin quickly developed its own distinctive style, characterized by its robust naturalism, intricate details, and the sheer volume of production. I could almost hear the debates echoing in academic halls as scholars meticulously compare the artistic nuances of pieces from Ife and Benin, seeking the subtle clues of influence and innovation. The mastery they achieved, transforming raw, imported metal into masterpieces that endure for centuries, speaks volumes about their ingenuity and the profound value they placed on this extraordinary material. This spiritual and practical significance of bronze paved the way for the incredible artistic techniques you're about to explore. You've felt the spiritual weight of bronze in Benin, understood its profound significance beyond mere metal. Now, prepare to be truly astonished as we peel back the layers of how these incredible works were actually created. We are talking about the lost wax casting method, a technique so intricate, so precise, that its mastery by the Edo people, centuries ago, stands as a testament to their unparalleled metallurgical and artistic genius. This wasn't some crude banging of metal. This was advanced, sophisticated engineering mixed with breathtaking artistry. Imagine a bustling artisan's compound, perhaps a section of the Aba's palace dedicated solely to the Royal Brasscasters Guild. The Ijan Iran. When you hear the rhythmic hum of activity, the soft whispers of instruction, the careful clinking of tools. The atmosphere is one of focused intensity. For a single mistake, could ruin months of work. The process begins not with metal, but with wax. This is the quirky tidbit. The initial sculpture, the very heart of the finished piece, was painstakingly molded from beeswax, often mixed with other substances, to give it the right consistency. You can picture the master craftsman, his fingers nimble and precise, carefully sculpting every detail of a future plaque or head. He adds every intricate scale on a crocodile, every delicate line on a human face, every tiny bead of a ceremonial costume, all in wax. It's like creating a perfect, ephemeral twin of the final metal object. You might even chuckle at the thought of someone accidentally leaving a wax sculpture too close to a fire and watching their masterpiece literally melt away. Once the wax model is complete, it's covered with layers of fine clay, carefully applied to capture every detail. This initial layer is followed by coarser layers of clay and grog-crushed pottery until a robust mold is formed around the wax. Small channels or sprues are added, which will later serve as pathways for the molten metal to enter and for air to escape. This is a mainstream historical fact. The creation of these multi-layered clay molds was a critical and highly skilled part of the process, requiring deep understanding of materials and heat. You can almost feel the clay, cool and pliable at first, then drying and hardening around the delicate wax form. Next comes the magic, or rather, the precise science of the foundry. The entire clay mold is heated in a furnace, a process that simultaneously hardens the clay and crucially melts the wax model inside. The molten wax then flows out through the sprues, leaving behind a hollow cavity that is an exact negative impression of the original wax sculpture. This is the lost wax part of the process. The wax is literally lost, sacrificed for the sake of the metal. Imagine the smoke curling upwards, the smell of burning wax, and the anticipation as the last drop drips out, leaving behind a perfect void. Then, the molten bronze is poured into this cavity. The Aegean brass casters would heat their bronze alloy in crucibles, bringing it to temperatures high enough to turn the metal into a glowing liquid. You can almost feel the intense heat radiating from the furnace. See the shimmering surface of the liquid metal as it's carefully poured. Once the bronze cools and solidifies, the clay mold is carefully broken away, revealing the magnificent metal artwork within. This final stage requires immense care to avoid damaging the delicate bronze. Historians still argue whether the Edo brass casters possess precise pyrometric knowledge to gauge temperatures, or if their mastery was purely empirical, passed down through generations of trial and error, a deep intuitive understanding of heat and metal. Regardless, the result was consistently stunning. The level of precision, the ability to create incredibly thin-walled castings, and the intricate detail they achieved are simply breathtaking. Makes you wonder what other metallurgical secrets they held, fading away like a whispered dream. With the mysteries of lost wax casting unveiled, you can now truly appreciate the sheer brilliance of the Benin artisans. But who guided these master craftspeople, who commissioned these breathtaking pieces that served as historical archives, spiritual vessels, and powerful symbols? The answer, as you've probably gathered, is the Aba's artistic patronage. The royal court was not merely a consumer of art. It was the engine, the inspiration, and the meticulous curator of Benin's artistic mastery, and in turn, its cultural identity. Imagine the grand halls of the Aba's palace, not just as a center of political power, but as a vibrant, living museum. Every wall, every pillar, every open courtyard told a story, adorned with the dazzling bronze plaques and ivory carvings. The Oba understood, perhaps instinctively, the profound power of visual representation. These artworks were propaganda in the most sophisticated sense, a tangible manifestation of his divine authority. His military triumphs, and the prosperity of his kingdom. You can almost see visitors from distant lands, their eyes wide with wonder, gazing upon these metallic narratives, instantly understanding the might and majesty of Benin. It was a clear message: we are powerful, we are rich, and we are divinely blessed. And let's be honest, it probably worked better than a PowerPoint presentation. A mainstream historical fact is that the Oba maintained a strict monopoly over the production of bronze and ivory art. Only the Igen, Iran, the Royal Brasscasters Guild, housed within specific quarters of Benin City, were permitted to cast these precious metals. This wasn't just about quality control. It was a clever way to control the narrative and prevent rival chiefs from accumulating their own symbols of power. You can imagine the intense training within the guild, where techniques were passed down through generations, often father to son, shrouded in secrecy and ritual. This exclusivity ensured that the art served the OBA's agenda, reinforcing the centralized power structure. Now, for a quirky tidbit, beyond the grand historical plaques, the Brasscasters also produce smaller, more personal items for the OBA, sometimes imbued with surprising whimsy or intimate detail. There are accounts of small figures of animals, or even miniature representations of specific rituals, perhaps serving as aids for memory or personal devotion. Imagine the OBA after a long day of ruling, quietly examining a newly cast bronze figure of a leopard, appreciating the intricate spots and the powerful musculature. A moment of quiet reflection amidst the grandeur. It suggests a more human side to the divine ruler, a connoisseur of fine craftsmanship beyond the purely political. Historians still argue whether the Igen Guild members were considered highly privileged royal servants, or if they held a unique, almost semi-autonomous status due to their indispensable skills and spiritual associations with their craft. Were they simply highly skilled laborers? Or did their ability to transform metal into sacred forms grant them a special position in the complex social hierarchy of Benin? You can almost picture the lively debates among scholars, poring over ancient records and analyzing the symbolic meanings embedded in the art itself, trying to decipher the precise power dynamics within the palace walls. What is undeniable, however, is that their artistic output was central to the kingdom's identity. The collaboration between the visionary Abas and these incredibly skilled artisans resulted in a flourishing of art that wasn't just beautiful, but profoundly functional in shaping the kingdom's image and solidifying its cultural identity for centuries to come. Their work stands as a permanent testament to the power of royal patronage in fostering artistic brilliance. Having marveled at the sheer sophistication of Benin's bronze casting and the central role of the Abba's patronage, your mind now naturally drifts to the whispers of external influence, to the echoes of another great artistic center that predates and perhaps even inspired Benin's mastery. We're talking about Ife's enduring influence, relationships so profound it's like two ancient rivers flowing in parallel, occasionally intertwining and enriching each other's currents. Imagine the ancient Yoruba city of Ife, located to the northwest of Benin, flourishing centuries before Benin reached its artistic peak. Ife was, and still is, revered as the spiritual heartland of the Yoruba people, the mythical birthplace of humanity. And from this sacred ground emerged some of the most exquisite naturalistic sculptures the world has ever seen, primarily in terracotta and brass. When you look at the serene, almost ethereal faces of Ife heads, then turn to the powerful, often more stylized faces of Benin bronzes, you can't help but feel a profound connection, a shared aesthetic language. This visual dialogue is a mainstream historical fact. The artistic traditions of Ife and Benin are undeniably linked, showcasing a remarkable exchange of ideas and techniques between two powerful West African civilizations. You can almost feel the intellectual curiosity, the artistic admiration that flowed between these ancient kingdoms. Recall our quirky tidbit from Section 1 about Iranmian, the prince from Fa, who is said to have fathered the first Abba of Benin. This foundational myth itself speaks volumes about the perceived relationship between the two kingdoms. Whether literally true or symbolically significant, it weaves a narrative of ancestral connection, bestowing legitimacy upon the Benin monarchy. By linking it to the revered spiritual authority of Ife, you can almost hear the story being retold around a flickering fire, symbolism strengthening the ties that bound these powerful entities. It's a bit like a royal family tree where a prestigious ancestor adds extra sparkle to your crown. Now, while the influence of Ife on Benin's bronze casting is widely accepted, the exact nature and extent of this transmission remains a fascinating subject of debate. Historians still argue whether the technology of lost wax casting was directly introduced to Benin from Ife, perhaps by an Ife master craftsman sent by Iranmian himself, or if it was an indigenous development within Benin that was then refined and elevated through contact and inspiration from Ife. Was it a direct transfer of knowledge, like a masterclass, or a more organic evolution? Spurred by observing the stunning results from their neighbors, you can almost picture the academic conferences filled with passionate arguments as scholars dissect every stylistic nuance, every chemical trace in the metals, to uncover the precise lineage of this artistic mastery. What is undeniable is that Benin artists, while clearly influenced, developed their own distinctive style. Ife sculptures are generally characterized by their idealized naturalism and serenity, often depicting rulers or deities with almost portrait-like fidelity. Benin bronzes, while sometimes naturalistic, often exhibit a more robust, frontal, and hierarchical style, focusing on royal power and historical narrative. They incorporated unique Benin symbols and motifs, evolving the art form to suit their own political and cultural needs. You might see a subtle smirk on a Benin Abba's face that you wouldn't find on a more stoic Ife head, or a more exaggerated, powerful stance. This artistic evolution demonstrates not mere mimicry, but a creative assimilation and bold reinterpretation. Forging an identity that was distinctly Edo, this enduring influence from Ife, coupled with Benin's own innovative spirit, contributed significantly to the unparalleled artistic output that would captivate the world. With the artistic foundations firmly understood, from the sacred nature of bronze to the intricate lost wax process and the stylistic echoes of Ife, and your focus now broadens. Art, after all, does not exist in a vacuum. It requires resources, and the production of such magnificent quantities of bronze and ivory art points to something else entirely, a flourishing economy, driven by sophisticated trade routes and riches. Benin was not just an artistic hub, it was a powerful commercial center, strategically positioned to leverage the wealth of West Africa. Imagine the sheer volume of goods flowing into and out of Benin City, vibrant nexus of commerce. You can almost hear the babble of different languages, the haggling over prices, the distinctive scents of various commodities. The kingdom sat at a crucial intersection of ecological zones, the rainforest to the south offering valuable timber, cola nuts, and palm products, and the savanna to the north, providing opportunities for agriculture and access to wider trans-Saharan trade networks. This strategic location allowed Benin to act as a powerful intermediary in regional trade. You might see a caravan arriving from the north, laden with salt and textiles, ready to exchange for the forest products that Benin controlled. A mainstream historical fact you should recognize is that long before the Europeans arrived, Benin was deeply integrated into extensive internal African trade networks. Goods like cola nuts, cloth, and agricultural produce were traded internally. But even more importantly, Benin engaged in trade for vital raw materials. We already touched upon this with copper and zinc for bronze casting, which likely came from distant sources through a series of intermediaries. Imagine the complexity of these supply chains, trust and negotiation required to secure such crucial imports over vast distances. It was a pre-industrial global economy, operating with remarkable efficiency. Now for a quirky tidbit. One of Benin's lesser-known but highly valued trade. Commodities was intricately woven cloth. Edo people were skilled weavers, producing fabrics from cotton and raffia palm fibers, often dyed with vibrant natural pigments. While not as flashy as bronze, these textiles were highly sought after within West Africa, used for clothing, ceremonial attire, and even as a form of currency. In some regions, you can almost feel the softness of a finely woven cotton garment, or admire the geometric patterns on a raffia skirt. It's easy to focus on the gleaming metal, but sometimes the quiet hum of a loom tells a story just as rich. When the Portuguese arrived in the late 15th century, they found a kingdom that was already economically robust and highly organized, not a primitive society. This is a crucial point often overlooked in Eurocentric historical narratives. The Portuguese were eager to establish trade relationships, primarily seeking gold, ivory, and pepper. In exchange, they offered goods like copper manillas bracelets that served as currency, coral beads, and sometimes even firearms. This interaction brought new dimensions to Benin's trade, connecting it directly to European markets. You can picture the initial awe and suspicion on both sides as these two vastly different cultures met. Navigating the complexities of exchange, historians still argue whether the arrival of European traders significantly altered Benin's pre-existing economic structures, or if it merely added another layer to an already sophisticated system. While European trade certainly brought new goods and opportunities, Benin maintained considerable control over the terms of trade, carefully regulating access to its markets and resources. The kingdom's wealth is derived from its control over trade routes, and its own agricultural and craft production has provided the essential resources for the Abbas to commission the vast quantities of bronze and ivory art that we admire today. This economic prosperity was the silent, steady heartbeat beneath the shining splendor of the palace, fueling the very artistry that defines its legacy. With the economic engine of Benin humming along, fueled by its sophisticated trade networks, your journey now brings you to the very heart of the kingdom's power, its spiritual core, and its artistic epicenter, the ABA's palace. This wasn't just a building. It was a sprawling complex, a city within a city, reflecting the grandeur and intricate hierarchy of the Benin kingdom. Imagine a place where power, spirituality, and daily life converged in a dazzling display of organized majesty you stand before. The immense walls of the palace, perhaps seeing the sunlight glinting off the very bronze plaques we discussed earlier, adorning key entryways and courtyards. These weren't just decorative. They acted as visual chronicles, recording the reigns of Abba's important ceremonies, military victories, and the hierarchy of court officials. It's like an ancient, three-dimensional history book etched in metal, telling tales of greatness for all to see. A mainstream historical fact is that the palace complex was meticulously organized, with distinct courtyards and halls dedicated to various functions, from judicial proceedings to religious rituals and royal living quarters. You can almost trace the pathways moving from public reception areas to more private sacred spaces. Within these palace walls, life revolved around the Oba. He was the sun around which all else orbited. You'd witness a constant stream of activity, chiefs arriving to pay homage and report on their provinces, artisans presenting newly commissioned works, foreign envoys seeking audience, and priests conducting elaborate rituals. The air would be thick with the scent of incense, the murmur of voices, and the occasional burst of drumming during ceremonies. This bustling hub was a testament to the OBA's centralized power and his role as both a divine ruler and the chief administrator of the kingdom. Now for a quirky tidbit, the palace was not static. It was continually rebuilt and expanded over the centuries, often incorporating materials from previous structures. This meant that the palace itself was a living archive, layers of history literally embedded in its very fabric. Imagine archaeologists in the distant future trying to decipher the various phases of its construction, each new addition telling a story of growth, change, and renewal. It's a bit like a particularly complex game of Jenga, but instead of taking blocks away, they kept adding more, making it grander and more intricate. The courtyards within the palace were particularly important. They often featured altars dedicated to past Abbas, adorned with magnificent brass heads and ivory tusks carved with intricate scenes. These altars were central to ancestral veneration, a crucial aspect of Edo's spirituality. You can almost feel the solemnity and reverence as priests and the Abba himself performed rites, making offerings to honor the ancestors and seek their guidance and blessings. Historians still argue whether the primary function of these altars was purely religious, or if they also served a political purpose, constantly reminding everyone of the Abba's long and legitimate lineage and reinforcing his divine right to rule. Was it genuine devotion, or a clever form of ancestor-based marketing? Perhaps both, Beyond the formal ceremonies, the palace was also a center of education and cultural exchange. Young men aspiring to serve the OBA would spend time within the palace precincts, learning the intricacies of court protocol, administration, and warfare. Artists honed their skills, musicians perfected their craft, and storytellers preserved the kingdom's oral traditions. The Oba's palace was thus far more than just a royal residence. It was the vibrant, beating heart of the Benin kingdom, a place where history was made, preserved, and displayed for all to see, solidifying its identity as a powerful and sophisticated empire. From the bustling courtyards of the Oba's palace, where power and art converged, your perception of the Benin kingdom broadens even further. You've seen its artistic genius and its economic might. Let's consider another vital pillar of its enduring strength: warfare and diplomacy. The Kingdom of Benin wasn't just a cultural beacon. It was a formidable military power, capable of projecting its influence across a wide region through disciplined armies and shrewd diplomatic maneuvers. Imagine the warriors of Benin, not as a ragtag group, but as a highly organized and disciplined fighting force. You can almost hear the rhythmic march of their feet, the quiet clinking of their iron weapons. The core of the Benin army was composed of professional soldiers, often organized into various guilds or associations, each with its own leadership structure. A mainstream historical fact is that the Benin army was renowned for its effectiveness, particularly its ability to navigate the challenging rainforest terrain and its strategic use of defensive fortifications like the city walls and moats. These weren't just random skirmishes. These were well-planned campaigns executed with precision. The OBA, as the supreme commander, would often personally oversee military preparations or dispatch his most trusted generals. Their primary objectives were clear: to defend the kingdom's borders, suppress rebellions from subjugated territories, and expand control over vital trade routes and resource-rich lands. You might picture a tense council of war within the palace. The OBA listening intently to reports from his scouts, his generals outlining their battle plans with meticulous detail. It was a serious business, because the continued prosperity and security of the kingdom depended on it. Now for a quirky tidbit. The Benin army was among the first in West Africa to acquire and effectively integrate firearms from European traders. Though this came later in its history, initially, their strength lay in their iron weaponry, highly skilled archers, and disciplined formations. Imagine the psychological impact of a disciplined Benin army, advancing with their gleaming iron swords, perhaps even before the thunder of gunpowder arrived. Their understanding of local geography and their ability to campaign effectively in the dense forest gave them a significant tactical advantage over less prepared adversaries. They were essentially masters of their home turf, like a home team that never loses in their own stadium. Beyond brute force, Benin also excelled in diplomacy. They understood that not every dispute required a battle, and alliances could often be more beneficial than outright conquest. You can imagine envoys, richly dressed and accompanied by their own retainers, traveling to neighboring kingdoms, negotiating treaties, offering gifts, and forging strategic marriages to secure peace and favorable trade terms. This sophisticated approach to foreign relations allowed Benin to maintain a relatively stable power base for centuries. Historians still argue whether Benin's diplomatic successes were due more to the fear inspired by its powerful military, or to the genuine diplomatic skill of its envoys and the perceived stability of the OBA's rule. Was it a velvet glove concealing an iron fist, or a genuine desire for peaceful coexistence where possible? The kingdom's ability to project power, whether through the might of its armies or the finesse of its diplomacy, was fundamental to its longevity and prosperity. It allowed them to maintain control over their valuable trade networks, secure their vital resources, and ultimately provide the stability necessary for the flourishing of their renowned art. This delicate balance of military prowess and shrewd negotiation ensured that the Kingdom of Benin remained a dominant force in the region for centuries. Having explored the internal workings, the art, and the martial prowess of the Benin Kingdom, you now sense a new energy stirring on the horizon, an unfamiliar wind blowing across the vast Atlantic. This is the moment when the world as Benin knew it began to broaden dramatically with the arrival of the first European ships. We are now entering the period of European contact begins, a pivotal chapter that would forever alter the trajectory of this powerful West African empire. Imagine a clear day on the coast, perhaps sometime in the late 15th century. You're excited? Shouts, a mix of curiosity and apprehension, as strange ships, unlike anything seen before, appear on the shimmering horizon. These are the carracks and caravels of the Portuguese, daring navigators venturing down the West African coast. A mainstream historical fact is that the first significant contact between the Kingdom of Benin and Europeans occurred around 1485, when the Portuguese explorer João Afonso de Aveiro visited Benin City. This wasn't a sudden invasion, but a cautious, exploratory encounter, driven by Portuguese desires for new trade routes, gold, and a direct link to the spice trade. You can almost feel the mutual intrigue and wariness as these two vastly different cultures first laid eyes on each other. The Oba at the time, possibly Oba Ozalua, approached these newcomers with a calculated blend of curiosity and strategic foresight. He was not a weak ruler. On the contrary, Benin was at the height of its power. The Portuguese were impressed by the sophisticated organization of the city, its massive walls, and the evident wealth and authority of the Aba. This initial respect paved the way for the establishment of diplomatic and trade relations. You might picture the Oba seated on his throne, observing these pale-skinned visitors, perhaps trying to discern their true intentions and assessing what they could offer. It's like a very formal, high-stakes first date, but with much more elaborate headwear. A quirky tidbit about this early contact is that the Portuguese were particularly fascinated by the sophisticated bronze and ivory artistry they encountered. They even commissioned some pieces themselves, including depictions of Portuguese soldiers and traders, which now provide invaluable historical insights into these early interactions. Imagine a Benin brass caster meticulously studying the strange clothing and features of a Portuguese sailor, then translating them into the familiar, powerful forms of bronze. These foreigner plaques are a wonderful example of cultural exchange, and a reminder that art often transcends initial language. Barriers. The primary goods sought by the Portuguese were initially pepper, ivory, and slaves. In exchange, they offered goods like brass and copper manillas, which were readily adopted as a form of currency in the region. Coral beads, highly prized by the Edo elite, and, eventually, firearms. Historians still argue whether the initial phase of trade with the Portuguese was truly beneficial for Benin, or if it introduced disruptive elements that would eventually contribute to its decline. While it brought new wealth and certain technologies, it also integrated Benin into a burgeoning transatlantic slave trade, a commodity that would prove to have devastating long-term consequences. For a time, the relationship remained largeless by. Benin retained control over its internal affairs and regulated trade fiercely, maintaining its sovereignty. The OBA carefully managed access to the interior and dictated the terms of exchange, demonstrating the kingdom's strength even in the face of a new, technologically advanced presence. You can almost hear the Aba's stern decrees, ensuring that trade flowed on his terms, not theirs. This initial period of contact, while seemingly benign, planted the seeds for future entanglements and laid the groundwork for the profound shifts that would sweep across the entire As the initial cautious encounters between Benin and the Portuguese settled into a more regular rhythm of trade, you begin to feel the subtle yet profound changes rippling through the kingdom. The introduction of new goods, technologies, and ideas, while initially enriching, also began to twist the fabric of Benin society. Our focus now shifts to the shifting sands of trade, particularly how the burgeoning transatlantic slave trade, fueled by European demand, started to impact Benin's economy and social structure. Imagine the bustling port towns along the coast, perhaps Yucatan, where European ships would anchor. The initial commodities of pepper and ivory, while still valuable, were increasingly overshadowed by a darker, more lucrative cargo: human beings. A mainstream historical fact is that while slavery existed in various forms within West African societies before European contact, the scale and nature of the transatlantic slave trade were entirely different, driven by massive demand from plantations. In the Americas, Benin, like other coastal kingdoms, became involved in this horrific trade, exchanging war captives and sometimes criminals for European goods. You can almost feel the moral quandary, the uneasy shift from traditional forms of servitude to a brutal, dehumanizing system of mass export. The Oba and the powerful chiefs controlled this trade, acting as intermediaries. They often supplied captives acquired through warfare or from tribute paid by conquered territories. This meant that the economic incentive to engage in conflict with neighboring groups increased, as captives became a valuable commodity. You might imagine the Abas, generals, now considering not just territory or prestige, but also the potential human harvest from a successful campaign. It was a cruel calculus, distorting the very purpose of warfare. Now for a quirky tidbit: to control the slave trade and maintain their monopoly, the Abas of Benin eventually placed strict restrictions on how many slaves could be sold to Europeans, and even, at various points, imposed outright bans or severe limitations. This was partly due to a desire to protect their own population and partly to prevent the trade from destabilizing the kingdom's internal social order. Imagine the European traders, frustrated by Benin's selective policies, seeking to deal with less regulated coastal communities, testament to Benin's continued power and willingness to assert its sovereignty even in the face of immense pressure. It's a complicated legacy, showcasing both participation and attempts at control. While the slave trade brought considerable wealth to the OBA and the ruling elite in the form of European goods like brass, cloth, and firearms, it also introduced internal stresses. The focus on acquiring captives for trade could exacerbate tensions with neighboring states and potentially lead to internal corruption or conflict. Historians still argue whether Benin's involvement in the transatlantic slave trade was primarily a matter of economic pragmatism in a brutal global market, or if it significantly undermined the kingdom's long-term stability and moral fabric. Did the short-term gains outweigh the profound long-term costs in human terms and social cohesion? You feel the weight of this history, the uneasy balance between prosperity and moral compromise. The once clear waters of trade, initially bringing exotic goods and ideas, were now muddied by the currents of human exploitation. This shifting economic landscape, with its increasingly central focus on the human toll, would slowly but surely alter Benin's relationships with its neighbors and with the burgeoning European powers, setting the stage for even more profound changes in the centuries to come. The sands were indeed shifting, imperceptibly at first, but with a momentum that would eventually reshape the entire continent. As the transatlantic slave trade cast its long shadow, subtly altering Benin's internal dynamics and external relationships, you sense a gradual erosion of the kingdom's once unshakable power. The once vibrant hum of prosperity begins to be punctuated by discordant notes. We are now entering a period of decline and British encroachment, where internal struggles and increasing external pressures from European powers, particularly the British, would gradually chip away at Benin's sovereignty. Imagine the late 18th and early 19th centuries. The demand for slaves from the Americas was beginning to wane due to abolitionist movements. But in its place, European interest in raw materials like palm oil and rubber was growing. This shift, while seemingly less brutal than the slave trade, still created new pressures. Benin, having adapted its economy to European demands for certain goods, now had to readapt, often to less favorable terms. You can almost feel the frustration of the Oba and his chiefs as they navigated these constantly changing foreign demands, much like trying to keep up with the latest tech trends when you just mastered the last one. A mainstream historical fact is that by the 19th century, British influence along the West African coast was becoming increasingly dominant. It's unlike the Portuguese, who primarily sought trade. The British began to harbor ambitions for greater political and economic control. Driven by industrial needs for raw materials and the scramble for Africa, they started to establish consulates, sign treaties, often self-serving ones, and exert pressure on independent African states. Benin, once a powerful and respected trading partner, was increasingly viewed by the British as an obstacle to their imperial ambitions, particularly because of its continued control over trade and its refusal to allow unfettered access to its interior. Internal stability also began to fray. Historians still argue whether the decline in the UABA's absolute power was a direct result of external pressures from European trade, or if it was more due to internal factionalism and the increasing power of certain chiefs, who gained wealth and influence through their involvement in trade. Perhaps it was a feedback loop, with external forces exacerbating existing internal tensions. You can almost hear the whispered conspiracies in the palace, the subtle power plays among rival factions, creating cracks in the once solid foundation of the kingdom. Now for a quirky tidbit. During this period, some European visitors described Benin City as having fallen into disrepair, stark contrast to earlier accounts of its pristine condition. While these accounts might be exaggerated by colonial biases, they do hint at a kingdom facing economic challenges and perhaps a diversion of resources from urban maintenance to other priorities, like defending its dwindling autonomy. Imagine walking through once grand streets, noticing signs of wear, a chipped bronze plaque, less than perfectly maintained wall, hinting at the pressures beneath the surface. It's like finding a once magnificent antique, now a bit dusty and showing its age. The British, increasingly impatient with Benin's independence and its perceived resistance to free trade, which often meant trade on British terms, began to escalate their demands. They sought to abolish practices like human sacrifice, which, while deeply embedded in Benin's religious and political rituals, often associated with state ceremonies and ancestral veneration, provided a convenient pretext for intervention. You can feel the rising tension, the sense of an inevitable collision, as two vastly different worldviews clashed. The stage was being tragically set for a confrontation that would irrevocably alter the fate of the once proud kingdom of Benin. The sands had not just shifted, they were now swirling into a storm. You've witnessed the slow, insidious erosion of Benin's power, the mounting pressures from a relentlessly encroaching British Empire. Now brace yourself, for we are about to recount one of the most tragic and infamous chapters in the kingdom's history, the punitive Expedition's Fury. This event, often referred to as the Benin Expedition of 1897, was a brutal military campaign that resulted in the catastrophic destruction of Benin City and the systematic looting of its paralleled artistic treasures. Imagine the atmosphere in early 1897, thick with colonial arrogance and simmering resentment. A British delegation, led by acting Consul General James Robert Phillips, attempted to visit Benin City, despite explicit warnings from the OBA that such a visit at that particular time, during sacred religious festivals, was forbidden and considered taboo. A mainstream historical fact is that this delegation, traveling without adequate military escort, was ambushed by Benin forces. This incident, often referred to as the Benin Massacre by the British, served as the immediate and highly publicized pretext for the punitive expedition. You can almost feel the fatal misunderstanding, the clash of cultural protocols escalating into a tragic confrontation. The British response was swift, brutal, and disproportionate. A massive punitive force comprising over 1,200 British Marines, sailors, and colonial troops was rapidly assembled. You can almost hear the stern commands of the officers, the grim determination of the soldiers as they prepared for what they saw as an act of justified retribution. They advanced on Benin City from multiple directions, overcoming the kingdom's formidable defensive walls and the valiant resistance of its warriors. The kingdom, weakened by internal strife and facing a technologically superior foe, fought bravely, but was ultimately overwhelmed. Now, for a quirky tidbit, among the British forces were several amateur photographers, and their surviving images provide some of the earliest and most haunting visual records of the expedition. Capturing the burning city and the subsequent looting, imagine seeing these grainy, sepia-toned photographs. A chilling glimpse into the destruction of a magnificent civilization, providing a stark, undeniable record of what transpired. It's a bit like watching a slow-motion disaster unfold through a ghostly lens. Upon entering Benin City, the British forces engaged in widespread destruction. The city was systematically looted, its grand structures burned, and its sacred altars desecrated. The Aba's palace, the very heart of the kingdom that we explored earlier, was set ablaze. Its centuries of history and artistry reduced to ashes and rubble. The primary objective, beyond punishment, quickly became the acquisition of Benin's vast collection of bronze and ivory artifacts. Thousands upon thousands of these priceless treasures, the very plaques, heads, and figures that had graced the palace walls and altars, were systematically plundered. You can almost feel the desperate scramble, the chaos, as soldiers seized everything they could carry, piling up centuries of accumulated art and history like mere spoils of war. Historians still argue whether the British expedition was a genuine response to the ambush of Phillips's party, or if it was a premeditated act of imperial aggression, using the ambush as a convenient justification to conquer the last independent power in the region and gain access to its trade routes and resources. Was it revenge, or was it conquest disguised as retribution? Regardless of the primary motive, the consequences were devastating. The Oba was eventually exiled. The kingdom's independence was shattered. Its artistic heritage was scattered across the globe, becoming trophies in European museums and private collections. The fury of that expedition didn't just end a kingdom. It fundamentally altered the narrative of an entire civilization. You've borne witness to the fiery destruction of Benin City and the scattering of its treasures. Now, as the smoke clears and the echoes of conquest fade, our journey turns to the enduring legacy, loss, and reclamation of the Kingdom of Benin. For despite the devastation, the spirit of Benin and the power of its art have not been extinguished. Instead, they continue to resonate, informing our understanding of a complex history and fueling ongoing global conversations. Imagine the aftermath of the 1897 expedition. The British formally incorporated the shattered kingdom into their colonial protectorate. And Aba Oven Ramwan, the last independent Aba, was exiled. A mainstream historical fact is that thousands of Benin bronzes, ivories, and other artifacts were taken to Britain, where they were subsequently sold off to museums and private collectors across Europe and America. This dispersal was rapid and extensive, turning works of sacred and historical significance into curiosities and commodities for the Western world. You can almost see them being cataloged, tagged, and displayed in distant halls, far from the land and people who created them. It's a stark reminder of colonial power, where cultural heritage became spoils of war. Despite the physical destruction and the loss of its autonomy, the artistic legacy of Benin proved too powerful to be contained. The very act of taking the bronzes brought them to the attention of the wider world, inadvertently showcasing the immense artistic sophistication of a West African kingdom. These works profoundly challenged prevailing European racist notions about African primitivism. Forcing a revaluation of African history and art, you can almost hear the murmurs of surprise and admiration in European art circles as these masterpieces were first exhibited, shattering preconceived notions. Now, for a quirky tidbit, some of the original Benin bronzes, or part of the plunder, eventually ended up being melted down during World War I to produce ammunition. A tragic irony, given their original purpose often involved commemorating military victories. Imagine these ancient storied objects, rich with historical narrative, being reduced to their base metals for an entirely different conflict far across the globe. It's a particularly poignant example of how human conflict can erase history in unexpected ways. Today, the ongoing movement for the repatriation of the Benin bronzes is a central part of their legacy. You see fervent debates in museums, academic institutions, and international forums about the ethical obligations to return these looted artifacts to their rightful home. Nations and institutions are increasingly acknowledging the colonial injustice inherent in their acquisition. Historians still argue whether the return of these objects should be unconditional, or if it should involve collaborative partnerships, shared exhibitions, or digital access to ensure wider global appreciation while respecting their cultural origins? Is it about ownership or about reconciliation and shared stewardship? You feel the weight of this ongoing conversation, the powerful pull of history striving to correct past wrongs. Many pieces have been returned, with more conversations happening, a slow but steady tide turning. The legacy of the Kingdom of Benin, therefore, is not just one of lost grandeur, but of enduring artistry, profound historical significance, and a powerful symbol of the ongoing struggle for cultural restitution and decolonization. Its story, etched in bronze and remembered in oral traditions, continues to teach us about power, art, and the complex, often painful, intersections of human history. As the final images of this remarkable kingdom fade, you can reflect on the ingenuity, resilience, and lasting impact of a civilization that mastered bronze long before. Europe, the journey through the Kingdom of Benin, now gently draws to a close. You've wandered through its bustling markets, felt the weight of its sacred bronzes, and witnessed the rise and eventual fall of its mighty empire. The sounds of distant drums have softened. The vibrant colors of ceremonial attire have begun to mellow into a comforting twilight. All the grandeur, the power, the intricate artistry of the Abbas now settle into the quiet corners of your mind. Let the complex history, the debates, and the astonishing achievements simply drift, like dust motes catching the last rays of a setting sun. There's no need to hold on tightly, no quiz awaiting you in the morning. Just let the echoes of ancient ingenuity and resilience wash over you, a soothing current carrying you further into the quietude of the night. Imagine the immense silence, now descending upon those ancient city walls, the stories they hold whispered only by the wind. Rest easy now, knowing you've journeyed through a truly remarkable chapter of human history, testament to what incredible heights civilizations can reach. May your dreams be filled with ancient wisdom and the quiet beauty of a world that once shone so brightly. Sweet dreams.